October 31st, 2024, the Federal Aviation Administration issues Airworthiness Directive 2024-2102. 16,000 Lycoming engines suddenly under scrutiny, not for a minor issue, not for routine maintenance, for bronze metal contamination that could lead to catastrophic connecting rod failure and total engine power loss. The directive reads like a nightmare scenario for general aviation. Visual inspections required at every oil change, looking for bronze particles, the telltale sign that connecting rod bushings are disintegrating inside the engine. Finding them means immediate grounding. Missing them could mean engine failure without warning. Think about what this means. The IO-360 and its variants power the backbone of American general aviation. Cessna 172s training new pilots, Piper Arrows carrying families on vacation, Diamond DA-40s ferrying business executives, Robinson R-44 helicopters conducting medical evacuations. 16,000 engines, each one a potential time bomb according to the FAA's own assessment. But this wasn't a sudden discovery. The contamination traces back to non-conforming bushings manufactured between 2009 and 2017. That's 8 years of production, 8 years of engines assembled with defective parts, 8 years of aircraft taking off with components that Lycoming now admits were never right. The Lycoming IO-360 has been marketed for over 60 years as the gold standard of aircraft engine reliability. Fuel injected for consistent performance, the engine pilots trust. Flight schools built their fleets around it. Insurance companies set their rates based on its reputation. Pilots staked their lives on its dependability. Yet, here we are, a company that knew about these defective bushings as early as 2017 when they first issued Service Bulletin 630. 7 years passed between the internal acknowledgement and the FAA's mandatory directive. 7 years of voluntary compliance that many operators ignored. 7 years of engines wearing away from the inside, shedding bronze particles like breadcrumbs, marking the path to disaster. A pattern of deception. To understand how we got here, we need to examine Lycoming's history with catastrophic failures. This isn't their first rodeo with defective components and deadly consequences. February 15, 2005, a Texas jury delivers a stunning verdict. $96 million against Textron Lycoming, not for negligence, not for product liability, for fraud. The case centered on crankshaft failures and high-horsepower TIO 540 engines that killed 12 people between 2000 and 2002. The jury found something far more disturbing than mechanical failure. They found a deliberate cover-up. Interstate Southwest, Lycoming's crankshaft supplier, have been blamed for the failures. Lycoming claimed the forgings were defective. The Interstate had overheated the steel during production. The FAA accepted this explanation. Emergency directives were issued. Engines were grounded. Lives were disrupted, and Interstate's reputation was destroyed. But during the trial, a different story emerged. Internal Lycoming documents revealed they knew the real problem. Their crankshaft design was fundamentally flawed. The geometry created stress concentrations that would inevitably lead to failure. Engineers had warned management. Solutions had been proposed, and all of it had been buried to avoid the cost of a recall. The pattern was established. When failures occurred, blame the supplier. When questions arose, cite the millions of successful flight hours. When pressed for answers, produce technical data to overwhelm regulators. Never admit fault, never acknowledge design flaws, always protect the bottom line. This strategy worked for decades. Between 2005 and 2006, the FAA issued multiple airworthiness directives affecting thousands of Lycoming engines. Over 5,000 crankshafts required retirement. Another 3,800 engines needed immediate replacement. The 360 and 540 series engines, the workhorses of general aviation, were all affected. Lycoming's response? They provided replacement parts and promised improvements, but fought every lawsuit, challenged every finding, and maintained their engines were fundamentally safe. They pointed fingers at maintenance shops for improper procedures, at pilots for operational abuse, at fuel suppliers for contamination, everyone except themselves. Meanwhile, the failures continued. Not at epidemic levels, but steady enough to establish a pattern. A Cessna Cardinal in Florida, a Mooney in California, a Robinson helicopter in Texas. Each incident explained away as an isolated case. Each family told their loss was a statistical anomaly. The AOPA tracked these incidents, building a database that painted a troubling picture. The NTSB investigated crash after crash, often finding engine failure as a contributing factor. But without smoking gun evidence of systematic problems, the regulatory machinery moved slowly. Lycoming had good lawyers, deep pockets, and a reputation that seemed bulletproof. The cracks began to show. The first signs of the connecting rod bushings crisis appeared long before the FAA took action. Mechanics in the field started noticing unusual wear patterns during routine overhauls. Bronze particles in oil filters, connecting rod bushings showing signs of movement, small issues that didn't quite add up. Tom Martinez, an A&P mechanic with 30 years of experience, remembers the first time he saw it. 2011, maybe 2012, he recalls. IO-360 comes in for its 2,000-hour overhaul. Everything looks good until I pull the oil screen. Bronze everywhere. Not copper, which might be normal bearing wear. Bronze. That meant bushings. Martinez reported his findings to Lycoming. Their response? The wear was within acceptable limits. No service bulletin, no safety alert, just a recommendation to monitor the situation. But Martinez knew better. He started keeping his own records, photographing every contaminated oil screen, documenting every worn bushing. He wasn't alone. Across the country, mechanics were seeing similar patterns. Online forums buzzed with discussions about bronze contamination. Some operators started doing 50-hour oil changes instead of the recommended 100. Others invested in sophisticated oil analysis programs, looking for early warning signs. The problem stemmed from a change Lycoming made to reduce costs. In 2009, they switched suppliers for their connecting rod bushings. The new supplier offered a better price point, promising identical specifications. On paper, everything looked perfect. The bushings met dimensional requirements, they passed quality control, they were certified for installation. But there was a problem nobody caught, or nobody wanted to catch. The bronze alloy was subtly different. Under the extreme conditions inside an aircraft engine, temperatures cycling from Arctic cold to blazing heat, pressures that would crush ordinary metals, vibrations that could shake apart lesser machines, these bushings behaved differently. Instead of wearing gradually and predictably, they could shift in their housings. This movement created stress points that shouldn't exist. Bronze particles would break free, circulating through the oil system like microscopic bullets. Most would be caught by filters, but some would embed in bearings, score cylinder walls, or accumulate in critical passages. In 2017, 3 catastrophic failures changed everything. 3 training aircraft, all Cessna 172s used by flight schools, suffered connecting rod failures within 6 months. The first, in March, made a successful emergency landing. The second, in August, wasn't so lucky. The student pilot suffered serious injuries when the engine seized at 2,000 feet. The third, in October, killed a flight instructor and student when the connecting rod punched through the engine case, severing control cables. These weren't high-time engines on their last legs. The failures occurred at 627 hours, 1,400 hours, and 2,100 hours respectively, well below the 2,000-hour recommended overhaul interval, well within what any pilot would consider safe operating parameters. The investigations revealed a common thread: bronze contamination in the oil dating back months before the failures, warning signs that had been missed or ignored, maintenance logs showing normal oil changes with no notation of unusual wear. The engines had been slowly destroying themselves from within, and nobody noticed until it was too late. Lycoming could no longer ignore the issue. Service Bulletin 630 was issued, recommending enhanced inspections, but it was just that, a recommendation, not mandatory, not an admission of defect, just a suggestion that operators might want to look a little closer at their oil screens. Many operators, especially large flight schools with thin profit margins, ignored the bulletin. Extra inspections meant extra cost. More frequent oil changes meant more downtime. In a competitive market where every flight hour counted, voluntary safety measures were bad for business. The contamination crisis explodes. By 2023, the bronze contamination problem could no longer be contained through service bulletins and recommendations. The evidence was overwhelming. Independent testing labs were finding bronze particles in alarming percentages of oil samples. Insurance companies were beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. The threat of litigation loomed larger with each new incident. Superior Air Parts, ironically, found themselves in a similar position to Interstate Southwest years earlier. Superior had manufactured replacement connecting rod assemblies for Lycoming engines, approved parts that were supposed to be identical to original equipment. But they too had sourced bushings from the same problematic supplier, When their crankshafts started failing, the finger pointing began again. The FAA launched a formal investigation. What they found was damaging beyond mechanical failures. The defective bushings weren't a recent problem. They traced back to production runs from 2009 to 2017. Thousands of engines had been assembled with these components. Thousands more had received them during overhauls. The contamination wasn't a possibility. It was a certainty waiting to manifest. Internal documents subpoenaed during the investigation revealed Lycoming's knowledge of the problem went back years. Email chains between engineers discussed concerning wear patterns and unexpected bronze deposits. Quality control reports flagged batches of bushings for dimensional nonconformity that were later approved for installation anyway. Meeting minutes showed executives discussing the potential liability exposure of a recall versus the manageable risk of enhanced monitoring. The most damning revelation came from a whistleblower within Lycoming's supplier network. They revealed that Lycoming had been offered upgraded bushings in 2015, bushings with improved bronze alloy specifically designed to prevent the wearing issue. The cost difference? $12 per engine. Lycoming declined, citing unnecessary expense for unproven benefit. Meanwhile, the real-world consequences mounted. A Piper Arrow conducting pipeline patrol in Nebraska lost power at 500 feet. The pilot's skill alone prevented a fatal crash. A Diamond DA-40 in Florida suffered complete engine seizure during a training flight. Both occupants survived, but with serious injuries. A Robinson R-44 helicopter in California experienced catastrophic connecting rod failure during a medical transport. The pilot's auto-rotation saved 4 lives. Each incident added to the pressure. The Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, representing nearly 300,000 members, demanded action. The Experimental Aircraft Association called for mandatory inspections. Type clubs for affected aircraft published emergency recommendations. The aviation community was policing itself because the regulatory framework had failed to act quickly enough. The June 2024 Notice of Proposed Rulemaking was the FAA's attempt to get ahead of what could become a catastrophe. They proposed mandatory inspections at every oil change, detailed procedures for identifying bronze contamination, and required replacement of any suspect bushings. The comment period was heated, with operators calculating the cost in the millions and Lycoming still maintaining the issue was overblown. The reckoning, the 16,000 engine directive. When AD 2024-2102 became effective on December 5, 2024, it marked a watershed moment in general aviation. 16,000 engines suddenly under mandatory inspection requirements. The FAA's cost estimate, $17.3 million for compliance, seemed almost insultingly low to operators who knew the real impact. Consider what this means for a flight school with 20 IO-360 powered Cessna 172s. Each inspection takes the aircraft out of service for at least a day. If bronze is found, the downtime extends to weeks waiting for parts and scheduling maintenance. The lost revenue from grounded aircraft dwarfs the actual repair costs. Students transfer to other schools, instructors lose income, the entire business model crumbles. Private owners face different but equally challenging problems. Many purchased their aircraft believing the Lycoming engine was the most reliable choice available. Now they discover their engine might be contaminated with defective parts installed years ago. The pre-purchase inspection they paid for didn't catch it. The annual inspections didn't flag it. They've been flying a time bomb and nobody told them. The directive requires visual inspection of oil filters and screens at every oil change, but visual inspection is subjective. How much bronze is too much? What distinguishes normal wear from bushing failure? The FAA provided guidance, but mechanics in the field must make judgment calls that could ground an aircraft or allow a defective engine to keep flying. The human factor can't be ignored. Mechanics now face enormous pressure. Miscontamination, and they could be liable for a subsequent failure. Be too conservative, and they're accused of grounding aircraft unnecessarily. It's a no-win situation created by years of deferred maintenance and ignored warning signs. The deeper implications. The connecting rod bushing crisis reveals fundamental problems in how aircraft engines are certified, manufactured, and maintained. The certification process, largely unchanged since the 1960s, assumes manufacturers will act in good faith. It relies on self-reporting of problems and voluntary compliance with safety recommendations. When profit margins are thin and liability exposure is high, this honor system breaks down. The FAA's response time, 7 years from the first service bulletin to mandatory action, highlights the agency's reactive rather than proactive approach. Understaffed and overwhelmed, The FAA often accepts manufacturer explanations at face value. Only when bodies pile up or juries award massive verdicts does the regulatory machinery spring into action. The most troubling aspect is the erosion of trust. Lycoming built its reputation over decades of reliable service. Pilots trusted these engines with their lives. That trust, once broken, may never fully recover. Every rough idle, every oil pressure fluctuation, every unexplained vibration now triggers anxiety. Is this normal wear or incipient failure? Is that bronze in the oil or just a trick of the light? The economic impact extends far beyond the immediate cost of compliance. Aircraft with affected engines see their values plummet. Insurance premiums rise to reflect the increased risk. Flight schools struggle to attract students to train in aircraft with those problem engines. The entire general aviation ecosystem, already fragile, takes another hit. The internal ramifications. The AD's impact isn't limited to the United States. Transport Canada, EASA, and other international regulators typically follow the FAA's lead on American manufactured engines. Suddenly, operators worldwide face the same inspection requirements, the same groundings, the same costs. In developing nations where general aviation provides essential services, medical transport, agricultural support, remote area access, the impact is particularly severe. These operators often lack sophisticated maintenance facilities. They can't easily source replacement parts. A grounded aircraft might mean communities cut off from vital supplies or medical care. The international flying community has taken notice. European operators, long skeptical of American manufacturing quality, point to the crisis as validation of their concerns. Asian markets, growing rapidly and hungry for reliable aircraft, reconsider their engine choices. The damage to American aviation manufacturing's reputation reverberates globally. Meanwhile, competitors see opportunity. Continental Motors, despite their own historical issues, positions themselves as the reliable alternative. Rotax, dominant in the light sport market, eyes larger displacement engines. Even automotive engine conversions, long dismissed by certified aircraft owners, gain renewed interest. The monopoly Lycoming enjoyed for decades cracks under the weight of their own failures. The legal ramifications stretch across borders. International operators affected by the AD explore their options for compensation. Class action lawsuits spanning multiple jurisdictions are being organized. The $96 million verdict from 2005 looks quaint compared to the potential liability exposure from 16,000 affected engines worldwide. Looking forward, lessons unlearned. As we stand at the end of 2025, the same patterns that created the crankshaft crisis of 2005 and the bushing contamination of 2024 remain largely unchanged. Manufacturers still self-certify. The FAA still lacks resources for independent oversight. Economic pressure still incentivizes cutting corners. Lycoming, for their part, has responded to AD 2024-2102 with familiar tactics. They emphasize their engine's overall safety record. They provide statistics showing the vast majority of engines operate without incident. They offer warranty support and technical assistance, but they stop short of acknowledging systemic failures or accepting full responsibility. The company points to their 2017 service bulletins as evidence they acted responsibly. They note that operators who followed their recommendations would have caught the contamination early. They shift subtle blame to those who ignored voluntary safety measures. The message is clear. We told you to look, and if you didn't, that's on you. This ignores the fundamental question. Why were defective parts installed in the first place? How did non-conforming bushings pass quality control for 8 years? Why did it take catastrophic failures to trigger mandatory action? These questions remain unanswered, lost in technical discussions about bronze alloys and inspection procedures. New technologies offer some hope. Digital engine monitoring can detect subtle changes in performance that might indicate developing problems. Oil analysis programs can identify contamination before it becomes critical. Artificial intelligence could potentially predict failures before they occur, but these solutions require investment that many operators can't afford. The general aviation community has learned to adapt. Pre-purchase inspections now specifically look for bronze contamination. Type clubs maintain databases of affected serial numbers. Online forums share inspection techniques and warning signs. Pilots have become their own safety advocates, no longer trusting manufacturers or regulators to protect them. The verdict we're still waiting for. The Lycoming IO-360 and its variants remain the most common engines in general aviation. Tomorrow, thousands will start up on airport ramps worldwide. Most will run perfectly, carrying their passengers safely to their destinations. but some carry hidden defects, ticking time bombs of bronze contamination or stress-concentrated crankshafts. Every pilot who turns that key makes a calculation. They weigh the statistical probability of failure against the practical need to fly. They trust that inspections will catch problems before they become catastrophic. They hope that their engine isn't one of the unlucky ones. What if Lycoming had chosen differently? What if they had spent those $12 per engine in 2015? What if they'd implemented the crankshaft improvements their engineers recommended in the 1990s? How many accidents could have been prevented? How many lives saved? These questions haunt the industry. They underline every pre-flight inspection, every oil change, every unexplained vibration. The shocking truth about Lycoming's engines isn't just about mechanical failures or corporate malfeasance. It's about an industry that repeatedly chooses profits over safety, then acts surprised when the bill comes due. The question remains, when will we learn?